Good morning, everyone. We're ready to get started. Thanks for joining us. We are going to jump right in and share the information we have for you this morning. So our webinar today, we're going to be talking about mastering food safety risk. And we're going to do this focusing on the entire enterprise. We do have some innovations that we want to share with you that we know are going to help the industry and we think you're going to learn a lot from. So first of all, I want to start out by sharing today's presenters, right? So we're going to be sharing today, these are all partners of Active Food Safety. So our presenters are Dr. Hal King and me, Lori Stevens, Mick Miklos, and Josh King. And I'm going to turn it over to Hal now to get us started. Hal?
Thank you, Lori, and thank you guys for attending the webinar today with Active Food Safety. We are in the middle of a storm together that has challenged and has changed the business of the food industry. I believe we are already in a storm though. Next slide. Before this pandemic, the food industry was not preventing all foodborne disease outbreaks, and we were basically experiencing continual epidemics, not a pandemic, but continual epidemics. Just look at the most recent example where onions are caused 869 cases of salmonellosis, 116 hospitalizations. That's an epidemic. Next slide. Now during this pandemic, many of us didn't even know what a pandemic was until this new era of COVID-19. We have to also manage respiratory diseases in addition to foodborne diseases in our food industry. This is something that's even very difficult for us in the food business, in manufacturing and food retail and food service, is that we're working with something that's even more easily transmitted, a respiratory virus like COVID-19, and actually more lethal. Next slide, please. Just look at this storm. Look at the fact that before COVID-19, the potential transmission points of just one virus, norovirus, that actually does cause the largest number of foodborne illnesses in the food service industry. And then you add on top of that the COVID-19 that's actually spread from respiratory droplets in that same environment. Just think about this. How can you manage this storm of just two viruses in this new era of COVID-19 by not having a management system and a strategy to control these? Next slide, please. You really can't manage COVID-19, nor one virus, norovirus, nor all the other types of potential threats in foodborne diseases by just trying to figure out how you react to these things. You really need to be proactively challenged to work on these things to prevent them. You can't manage these things by the old ways of putting in controls and coming back to it once something comes out of control. The good news is that we can actually prevent all of these foodborne illnesses and this new challenge, COVID-19, by putting in the proper controls in our food service, in our food retail, our food manufacturing, and our distribution systems to actually prevent all of them. A great example would be, let's just look at COVID-19 and norovirus. If you follow the proper controls and you monitor the controls and make sure the controls are in effect on every day, you can actually prevent both norovirus and COVID-19 with almost all the same controls and actually prevent yourself having the issues related to the pandemic, but be prepared to prevent foodborne illnesses as well. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Lori to discuss how we can prevent these types of illnesses and continue to protect our customers and employees from COVID-19 by the new way we think you should be working to make this an enterprise level management system.
Great, thanks Hal. Okay, so let's dig into the best approach to getting these controls in place that Hal just was sharing with us. So I want to start out by sharing that we have all been in your shoes. So we've all sat in your seats. So we've run food safety programs at enterprise-wide food companies. And we know very well how challenging that is. Being responsible to manage food safety risk is so difficult. That's why we've created this new advisory firm So we're coming at it with a new way of thinking. We want to be able to help you build resilience and gain the ability to deal with this crisis and be prepared for future crises. So we've synthesized a new way of managing food safety risk, and we call it enterprise management. And so that's going to be a lot of what we're talking about today. We're going to share this new approach with you so you can see what we're thinking about, how we've synthesized our ideas, and to what we think the food safety industry needs right now. So our foundations of this thinking are in this slide. So what we've been doing is we've been researching and writing and publishing and presenting and studying and working with regulators to make sure that we're on the cutting edge of the new knowledge and new thinking around managing risk. So we share much of this work, this thinking or writing presentations, books on our website. And so tangible results of this work that we've been doing, and it really is the culmination of years of our experience, can be seen in our advisory services and in our mobile products. So these are the ways that we've come up with to help you implement these ideas and new thinking in a very cost-effective manner, so you get the knowledge to the people who are doing the work. So we feel strongly that technology is critical to implementing risk management. I mean, Josh is going to share more about this with you later in the presentation. But I want to dig in more into this enterprise management. But Hal, I'm going to ask you to kick us off here as we get into the details, please.
Thank you, Lori. What we call this new method for ensuring food safety management across your enterprise is enterprise mastery. We believe that if you actually master the food safety controls across your enterprise, and we're speaking in terms of a corporate business, the program, how you manage your supply chain, your distribution, and your retail operations or food service operations, we believe that you can actually master all of these controls and have confidence in the fact that not only are you going to prevent food safety issues, but we're going to show you how you're going to take that enterprise mastery concept and build it into growing your business, including things like increasing sales with food safety management systems. You're not going to believe that until I show you, but it's very, very important to understand because we're in business. We're in the business of food safety, but we're also in the business of serving food, and we want to grow our sales, especially now during this pandemic, where we're all dealing with lost sales, lost visits to the restaurant, in-house dining, that sort of thing. So let me kind of pose an example, not all the questions that you might need to ask yourself, and we recommend you come back to our website and look at these things in the future. But we like to look at a pre-assessment like way of determining whether you might actually have inherent risk in your enterprise. So some examples that we all know about very well are, we hear customer complaints about our products. For example, are you hearing customers continually complain to your restaurants or retail about a product you're having manufactured and packaged and sent to those facilities? Or are you experiencing this from customers complaining about your food service organization? Another question is, do your health department inspections continue to see the same repeat critical violations? You know, in the FDA food code, a foodborne illness risk factor is found by the health department. Those are usually called critical violations. But when they start to cite a restaurant or a retail establishment for those things, they're actually saying you have the risk and you're probably likely causing sporadic foodborne illnesses. And so the health department data can be very powerful as a way to tell you whether you're actually mastering the food safety controls properly there. And then another one might be, does your business continue to produce products that actually require withdrawals and recalls? So are you, as an enterprise leader, are you actually having to deal with CAPAs and allergen issues, for example, that are slipping through the system and you have to recall the product? I think we all know about the produce world. We're having to actually pull product, millions of dollars worth of product from our shelves or from our food service that are coming from these issues and lack of control in the produce world too. So we're actually going to talk about how you can master the enterprise and these controls through this new way we're thinking in enterprise mastery.
Great, thanks, Hal. So now that we've taken a look at some of the questions that might make us think we have an opportunity, Let's take a closer look at this new knowledge and this new thinking. So let's dig into what enterprise mastery actually is. So it's an innovative blueprint to manage food safety risk and to increase public health throughout an entire organization. So everywhere that's related to food. So enterprise mastery is what we wanted when we were in those seats, when we were responsible for food safety programs. This is the kind of thing that we were striving for, right? So when we were responsible for the risk going on in an organization, because this is the combination of a lot of different inputs. It's a tremendous amount of information that we've sat down and put together and said, if we were going to do this again, what's the ideal way to manage risk, knowing what we know now and combining all of our experience, which is pretty funny. It's like 60 years or more as we were talking about it as a team, which I think is pretty cool. So we've put this together and added in all of our experience, some blood, some sweat, some tears, as you all well know, that's part of the job as well. And we've also been doing deep dives into the regulation and then understanding the scientific studies and to see what those implications are on food safety. So the outcomes of enterprise mastery, so putting in this framework that's an idealized structure, are protecting public health, so increased profits, and risks that are proactively managed to prevent crises. So all of these things are what we're striving for every day. They're all critically necessary to protect the brand. These outcomes will enable your business to grow, be prepared for the next crisis, and to do it all safely and effectively. So what are the steps of this structured approach, right? So first of all, enterprise mastery looks at the actual risk in your business. And it does this by sort of bucketing it into 4 major sections depending on what you do, right? So food service, food retail, food manufacturing, and then supply chain and distribution. So the first thing we're going to do is look at all of those risks that are actual risk to your business. And so this, of course, includes COVID-19 risks, because those are inherent. We're never going to get away from those again. So then what we do next is look for the controls that are necessary to control those risks. So once we know the risks, then we can identify how we can manage them. Next then, we're going to look at who and what are responsible for managing these risks in the enterprise. What systems, what people, supplier, where in the supply chain, where in the restaurant, that kind of thing. So once all of this has been defined, we will use this structured blueprint to guide the creation of an enterprise-wide program to manage all of these risks that we've just identified. So it's a very stepwise process. So we see the old way of looking at risk management as looking at risk in a very piecemeal way. For years, we in the industry have listened to what other people had to say about building our own food safety programs. So we've listened to experts, we've listened to health departments, we've listened to regulators, and we've read regulation to the best of our ability. And we've looked at what other food companies are doing to manage their food safety risks. So all of those things are not what we have going on in our organizations. And so then we know it hasn't really moved the needle forward. It's because it's not building a program that's based on the risks that are the true risk within our organization. So with enterprise mastery, you're going to know exactly what to do to manage the actual risks in your organization. And I really want to stress that, that you will know what to put in place. And it's a big project. You're saying, Lori, that sounds great, but I don't have the manpower, the bandwidth, the budget to do all of that. But that's okay. If you can't tackle it all at once, which we know is the case 99% of the time, then you'll have a roadmap of what to do and how to implement an enterprise-wide program when you come out of the other side with what will be a gap analysis. So you do want to start with those pre-assessment questions that Hal just asked us earlier, right? So you want to say, do I have risks? And I'm pretty sure if you're honest with yourself, the answers will be yes. So if you ask yourself those pre-assessment questions and you don't like the answers, right, and you want to get started, but you don't really know where to start, then this initial gap assessment is a great way to do that. So this is one of the really neat things about Enterprise Mastery and the way it's set up as a structured framework. And it's an inherent benefit because of how it's structured. It's going to allow us to quantify risk in all the food-related areas of your enterprise. So we're going to come out with numbers at the end of this gap assessment that says your greatest risk is managing supplier controls, identifying product risks, those kinds of things. So that then this risk quantification naturally will turn into an implementation roadmap. And so just by doing a gap analysis, you're going to have so much more information about where to start in your organization. So it's really, I just get excited about it because it's such a powerful tool, even at the beginning stages, to inform what you need to be doing moving forward. So now I'm going to switch it over to Mick, and he's going to walk us through the power of regulatory relationships in managing risk in your enterprise. Mick?
Well, thank you, Lori, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to focus on something that is critical to any discussion of food safety management systems to control risk factors, yet it's something that's often overlooked, and that is the building of productive relationships between food establishment operators and the regulatory authority. Make no mistake about it, next slide, please. Make no mistake about it, the enterprise mastery approach is based on good science. Let's get that clear right at the beginning. In other words, what do FDA and CDC say? The 2017 FDA Model Food Code, Supplement, and Annex are the standards against which we measure food service establishment compliance. FSMA rules have improved supply chains, and food safety management systems must align with the 5 CDC risk factors and include protocols for verification and corrective action. Next slide, please. One of the most effective ways to achieve active managerial control of foodborne illness risk factors in a retail food service setting is through a method known as process HACCP. In contrast to food manufacturing, where only one product at a time is produced, restaurants often produce multiple food products in the same prep area and often at the same time. The enterprise mastery approach advocates for process HACCP because with it, the many variables found in the preparation of restaurant food can be divided into just 3 essential processes based on the number of times a given food's internal temperature passes through the temperature danger zone. It's good science. Next slide, please. And while science is undeniably the cornerstone of enterprise mastery, there is also an art to achieving compliance. And I refer to the importance of relationship building with the regulatory authorities. It is this climate of genuine collaboration, which is meant by the expression safe harbor that you see on the slide. And next slide, Lori, please. We all want the same thing at the end of the day, to protect public health and serve our customers in a way that achieves that. Where real collaboration with regulatory is absent, however, the industry is left to react. This can breed a culture of fear, especially during inspections. In turn, this creates a combative atmosphere between inspector and operator, which actually inhibits the learning necessary to control risk factors. Where positive relationships do exist, however, the culture of fear that is often described as the norm when inspectors visit restaurants is replaced by a genuinely collaborative environment. Next slide, please. While ensuring compliance is an objective of the enterprise mastery approach, the ultimate goal is to move from mere compliance, which focuses on the near term and is often measured from one inspection to another, to real long-term food safety culture change. Now, if this echoes in a familiar way, it may be because the FDA's new era of smarter food safety has identified improving food safety culture as one of its stated objectives. Next slide, please. Now, the first thing to understand about culture is that it is complex. It's often assumed that culture in an organization is homogeneous, a single belief system, if you will, like this monolith. and therefore more or less effective. But organizations are made up of subgroups. In other words, cultures have subcultures. Everyone in today's virtual audience knows this rings true based on your own personal experiences. The head office sends down a policy, but regional VPs interpret it differently. Department heads may vary the policy even more, so that by the time it gets down to the work teams, they may say, well, that may be what they say, but that's not how we do things here. When it comes to food safety, individuals at the restaurant level sometimes make very different assumptions than the corporate office does about the perceived value of risk mitigation. And these differences become self-perpetuating as new employees join the team and are taught by their peers. In such landscapes, a set of shared values, attitudes, and practices doesn't fall into place overnight. Next slide, please. Changing a culture involves many elements: training, practice and coaching, execution and positive reinforcement, repetition, verification, persistence over time, making the business case for food safety to the C-suite, which Hal will speak about in a few minutes, and establishing those affirmative relationships with the regulatory authorities. Next slide, please. It's not easy for an organization to rally all its subcultures around a common culture message. At Active Food Safety, we can help you create the framework for that culture of food safety, which is fundamental to delivering your brand promise, ensuring a positive customer experience, and for controlling risk. Next slide, please. Let me quickly share 3 examples of industry regulatory relationships that are yielding positive results. The Association of Food and Drug Officials is made up of government and public health officials, industry executives, professors, and consumer advocates who, despite differences, share a common goal to improve public health. Among AFTO's many committees is the Partners with a Common Purpose Alliance. The partners recognize that public health and consumer protection is a common purpose and a driver of successful collaboration between industry and regulatory authority. When this AFTO industry initiative, within this AFTO industry initiative, food safety professionals and regulatory officials engage with each other in safe harbor to examine their ability to impact food safety through discussion, self-examination, and forums. It was my privilege to be a founding member of the partners, and I currently serve as chair of its steering committee. Next slide, please. Most of you are familiar with the Conference for Food Protection. I like to call CFP a petri dish where potential changes to the FDA food code originate through a process of collaboration and consensus building among food safety stakeholders. While attending the 2016 biennial meeting of the conference, I had the opportunity to align industry and regulatory representatives around a recommendation to amend Section 8404.11 of the Food Code, which deals with ceasing operations. Paragraph C of this section now provides for the regulatory authority to consider allowing an establishment to continue operations in the event of a power or water disruption, as often occurs during natural disasters. If a written emergency operating plan has been approved by the regulatory authority, immediate corrective action is taken, and the operator notifies the regulatory authority upon implementation. As a result of this common sense amendment, all stakeholders in a community, citizens, food establishment operators and employees, first responders, and the regulatory agency itself all stand to benefit. Because of this genuine collaboration between industry and regulatory, entire communities will be able to return to normal faster. Next slide, please. Even in the midst of the current restrictions, we see opportunities to build relationships in the form of virtual inspections of food establishments. Although we have always coached persons in charge to engage with the inspector during an inspection, that sometimes doesn't happen in real life. Short staffing, checking in a food delivery, a sudden rush, or sometimes just that anxiety about engagement that I mentioned earlier can all be problematic. If there is a silver lining to virtual inspections, it may be this. Operator and regulator have no choice but to engage, as the regulator directs the operator to point the camera at this location or that process, and in so doing, the two have ongoing dialogue. That's how bridges are built, and that's how understanding is achieved. And ironically, separation has drawn us closer in this respect, at least among the good actors. Next slide, please. I hope you're beginning to see the ways in which enterprise mastery is a comprehensive approach to control food safety risk in an enterprise, founded on science, striving for compliance and culture change, and acknowledging the art of relationship building as critical to overall success. But that's not all. I'm about to pass the virtual podium to my colleague, Josh King, who will share the ways in which Active Food Safety leverages technology to bring you digital solutions. Thanks for your attention today. Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Mick. Hi, I'm Josh King, Director of Product and User Experience here at Active Food Safety. And like Mick said, I'm going to talk a bit about technology in the food safety space and how Active Food Safety is trying to innovate here. Next slide, please. So people have been using paper for a long time in the food safety space for things like internal auditing, temperature recording, expiration tracking, and so much more. But the use of paper for things so important to the public health has a lot of different issues. The paper could get lost, misplaced, or stolen. The data entered could be inaccurate or it could be interpreted wrong by the reader. And paper just doesn't last. So technology is much better than paper in that it will help you ensure food safety and therefore help your business in the process. Next slide, please. So as touched on before, food safety is not just a public health concern, but it's also a business concern. Ensuring good food safety while keeping people safe, which is obviously most important, will also ensure saved costs for your business through things like wasted foods, and as well as increased profits for your business as a whole. We've seen technology start to emerge in the food safety space over the years, but I think it's now beyond time for technology to fully disrupt the food safety space as a whole and kind of turn it on its head. And that's where Active Food Safety comes in. So Active Food Safety was created around the idea of modernizing the food safety space. We're doing that through brand new state-of-the-art enterprise mastery, as was talked on before, in our advisory services, as well as creating modern solutions to food safety problems. We're kind of combining food safety science with great modern user experience-led design and new development tools to create awesome digital solutions in this food safety space. Next slide, please. One such solution that we've created here is our tool called Emergi Protect. Emergi Protect is completely free. It's a mobile app available on both iOS and Google Play stores. And it's an app that provides emergency operating procedures for your restaurant managers to refer to in all kinds of emergency situations. So instead of flipping through a manual or scrounging around trying to find your emergency sheet under a stack of papers, your managers can just grab their phones out of their pockets and have full access to all of their emergency operating procedures for your restaurant. The app covers things like customer and employee illness situations, allergic reactions, contamination controls like the new COVID guidelines from the FDA, body fluid cleanup procedures, power outages, boiled water notices, and natural disaster situations. The app was developed, tested, and is continuously updated in real time by our experts here at Active Food Safety. And again, it's completely free. More technology and innovation is always in the pipeline here at Active Food Safety, and we have a lot of cool stuff to show you in the future. And I really hope you will stick around and join us for that when the time comes. You can go to our website here at activefoodSafety.com. And please also follow us on all the social medias. We have a Twitter at Active Food Safe, Instagram at Active Food Safety, and LinkedIn, of course, at /company/Active Food Safety. And now I'm going to send it back over to Dr. Hal King to speak more on the business side of what we're doing here at Active Food Safety.
Thank you, Josh. And I love the idea and concept of empowering the end user with technology, because again, at the end of the day, a nice enterprise system with great SOPs, EOPs, alignment to management, all the things we know in the business. But if the end user is not actually practicing the tools and using the tools, we know it's not happening. You know, a great example would be, we're all told we're supposed to screen employees to make sure they don't work sick with vomiting and diarrhea. But if you don't actually do that on every shift, and if you end up having to exclude somebody at a shift, if you don't have a technology tool to help make sure that they don't get rescheduled and come back to work, you basically just have a piece of paper with an SOP or an EOP. In order to ensure the control is there, you've got to have technology to help give you that confidence it's working. So thanks, Josh. That is really important. The end user has these easy to use tools to help them drive that. Now, one part of enterprise mastery, and I think Mick mentioned this, and so did Lori, was that we are looking at enterprise mastery kind of differently than past food safety management programs have been sold or presented to the industry from regulatory, which is enforcement, right? You have to do it. This is what you need to do, versus a business model that actually, when you implement food enterprise mastery, you're actually going to be able to grow your business. Okay, so we look at this kind of two ways. One is, what are the value drivers we all are aware of or familiar with that we know that actually can grow our business? Now, these might not be something that you've thought about in food safety management before, but we also know in the business world that these value drivers create value, right? Which, in other words, they create increased sales. They create the growth of the business. They create, you know, ability to actually borrow more money to open up more restaurants, you know, because, or reduce costs and things because we're actually doing better and managing food safety risk. So I'm going to show you some examples of how these value drivers directly influence the cost of the business, potentially prevent the loss in the business, which is what we all tend to focus on, and actually can grow the business. Next slide, please. So, you know, most of us have looked at food safety programs and the absence of these in a reactive mode, that if we put something in place, we might prevent an issue like for a foodborne illness outbreak or something like that. But we usually consider those things as just loss. So in order to make sure we don't have loss and significant loss to the business, let's make sure we have good insurance, good liability insurance. You know, that's really not the way to look at the business model for preventing foodborne disease outbreaks and COVID-19 today. I think you actually have to look at it that, yes, those costs are there, but what does it cost me as it relates to implementing a system to prevent them, where I can actually not only prevent the loss that might occur from an outbreak, but actually can use that to leverage the growth of my business and sales. So let's just look at two examples. One would be, we all know, we all talk about, what are the actual loss that we could experience in our business if we don't prevent foodborne disease outbreaks and things like that. And then the second one I'm going to talk really briefly is about what happens if we actually increase health inspection scores. Can that be leveraged directly to actually grow our sales? Let's talk about this next. Next slide, please. So many of us have probably seen this report in Johns Hopkins, and, you know, great university, well respected. It was pretty shocking when we saw it. It's that the actual cost was studied and modeled of several different types of restaurant businesses. They looked at fast food restaurants or quick serve restaurants in that area, fine dining restaurants. You know, they looked at the different variables in the food service industry, and they actually equated a model of the actual cost to that single location if there was a foodborne disease outbreak. Now, they did anything from 5 people were sick all the way to multiple people that are sick, which is kind of what you see in the industry. So it did model about what's happening. But if you look at what they found, it's pretty shocking that a single foodborne disease outbreak can go from a single location from almost $4,000 to $2.5 million, right? We know that the largest cost on these restaurants are just basically going to drop profit. Remember, we're in the business of food safety and you're in the business of selling food, right? So lost profit comes from cost. Next slide, please. So let's just take an estimated cost that we looked at as it related to a single foodborne disease outbreak in a fast food restaurant or a fast casual restaurant or a fine dining restaurant. So on the left-hand side, look at the cost of just actually experiencing one of these outbreaks with 5 people. It's about $4,000, $6,000, $8,000 respectively in each of these. But let's look at actually what it would cost to actually implement a prevention system to make sure you don't experience that loss. let's just say one restaurant in these areas had 3 certified food safety protection managers that actually were going to manage the food safety on a day-to-day basis every shift, about $1,100. Let's say every employee of at every shift is trained on the minimum standards of how to handle food safety. Food handler courses do that, about $375. And then let's just say we're going to put one of Joshua's cool mobile app systems in place to manage the food safety management system. So the manager actually has the tool at the end point where they can actually make sure execution's happening at every shift, right? Remember, key to this is execution. If you're not executing the AOPs and SOPs, you're not really preventing foodborne disease outbreaks. The total cost of doing one location with just those minimum standards that even the FDA tells us are the criteria and minimum standard to prevent foodborne disease risk factors and can increase health inspection scores from that is about $2,000. So look at the comparison. If you spend $2,000, you could actually prevent all this loss. And remember, the Johns Hopkins studies actually just looks at this is the minimum of 5 people. Most of these outbreaks are a lot larger than 5 people. So you could just kind of look at the exponential cost. It's not good. Next slide, please. So let's look at another example, health inspection scores. You know, we all like to track that data. We probably continually see the same type of foodborne illness risk factors across the chain, for example. And we say, why can't we just, you know, we're getting a 90 or an A on our health inspection score, that's good, but we continue to see the same foodborne disease risk factor there. You know, not excluding employees who are sick, or glove use, or proper glove use, or hand washing, all those things that we see as violations that lead to foodborne disease outbreaks. Yelp did a study a few years back that actually was really interesting and probably one of the first that quantified some of this lost sales that you could recover and increase your sales and profit. So their main findings were that when customers were reviewing Yelp and looking for restaurants, and Yelp was actually putting in health inspection score data on those restaurants as it looked related to the customer interaction, they saw a 12% decrease in purchase intention of all the customers for each of those restaurants. And then when they actually started to highlight in the Yelp score a little icon that would pop up saying, maybe this is a poor score. So they actually, instead of just having the data there, they actually highlighted that to the customer. The customer could choose whether they wanted that or not, right? They could click a button, choose I want to see and be alerted to if there's a poor score here. It actually increased the purchase intent, decreased the purchase intent, of an even additional 9%. So almost 21% of potential lost sales where customers saw that information and went, nope, I'm going to avoid that. I'm not going there. That's pretty powerful that if you could just ensure that you're making sure you're controlling the top 5 risk factors, these foodborne disease illness risk factors in a restaurant, and the health inspector is really the outcome. They're going to go check that. You could actually increase your sales by controlling what the customers are getting to see because you're actually doing great on your health inspection scores. Next slide, please. And so kind of in a summary of this enterprise mastery thinking as it relates to everything you've heard so far, that it kind of builds on a program to ensure that, like Lori said, you've identified what your hazards are and where they're at. You've identified who's responsible to control and manage those. You build a program around making sure that that's happening all the way from the endpoint user in the retail food service or food manufacturing area, all the way up to the enterprise where someone like me, Lori, or Mick are sitting in our chair, in our former respective businesses and go, I have confidence that we're controlling allergens down here in the restaurant, or I have confidence I'm controlling salmonella in this process because I'm doing this method of control and I'm checking that control, making sure it's happening. But when you think about kind of taking these value drivers, many we know, like Mick mentioned, regulatory compliance is huge, not only just because they actually set the standards, and many times, most of the time, the CDC and the FDA are giving us the best science and then converting it into what they think we should be doing and what we should do to prevent foodborne disease outbreaks and now COVID-19 in our businesses. But the regulatory compliance is really where you got to start, the minimum standard, because like Mick said, the relationship with them is now even more important for the public health. And the public is looking at us to expect that. But if you just look at that and then cost of an outbreak, I just gave you an example of the growth of the brand awareness that you're actually a value driver because you're a safe place to eat, your customer experience that they have when they look at your social media or they look at what other customers are saying about your restaurant or your retail service or your food business that you manufacture these products and sell them through retail They're going to see all this stuff basically that's going to affect the bottom line of your business, but they're going to be value drivers that you can see are going to create more value in the business and reduce those costs that you actually are experiencing through loss and through the cost of doing business, but actually increase your profits. So we really think that enterprise mastery is the way to do this, to not just have a process in place to manage risk, but to have a culture that actually ends up in the business as a means to grow the business, and everybody's aligned to that culture to grow the business and ensuring food safety and public health. Back to you, Lori.
Great. Thanks, Hal. Good. So we know that we've presented a lot of information today, just a ton of stuff coming at you that we think are critical ways of looking at the industry, and we wanted to share today. So if you want to keep this conversation going, please feel free to contact us. So we're super excited about this. So you can tell from what we've been sharing today that we are passionate about what we're doing, right? So we started this partnership because we know there's still a lot of work to be done. There are a significant amount of foodborne illness still in the US, and that's resulting in deaths as well. So we have called this partnership active food safety for a very specific reason. It's because you can't ever stop actively analyzing risk or identifying risk or making sure the controls are in place or that they're effective in your organization. So very specific why we've come up with the name Active Food Safety. So to wrap up our webinar today, let's take a look at the questions that were submitted as we presented here. Okay, so we've gone through our slides, so feel free, please, to put in the questions, and we will address those. We did really well on time, so that's good. So we've got some time for questions. And we've got a couple here, so I will start those and we will address them. Hal, this one, I know this first one is for you. So the question is, what should we expect and how should we prepare this fall and this winter when COVID-19 and the flu meet? It's a good one.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's some good news, a lot of good news, and there's a little bit of bad news. The good news is the way to prepare now is just to make sure that you have an active wellness check program, that you're screening all employees for their signs and symptoms, and then you have a really good, well-defined way to track those you have excluded. So let's say Lori either tests positive or Lori has the symptoms of vomiting, diarrhea, sorry, Lori, and I send her home. Well, you've got to make sure you don't have another manager 2 days later reschedule Lori because Hal's off this week and he sent Lori home, but there was no way to document that Lori shouldn't be coming back to work for 10 days, right? This is the bad news because many don't do this. And in the new world that's coming, which is flu and COVID-19 seasons, we haven't really experienced this. There are some differences in how you actually do that and allow someone to come back to work. It's going to be really critical. First, the signs and symptoms, and thank you, CDC, for getting us all this information, because again, if you didn't have a place, a one-stop shop to get this information, probably we'd all go crazy. But just be able to go and get the top line, what do we need to do kind of information has really been helpful from CDC, so thank you. But the signs and symptoms are pretty much the same as flu and for COVID-19. They can be based on the different types of mildness or severity, very, very similar, including vomiting and diarrhea of flu and COVID-19. One very significant difference that has not been reported in flu is loss of taste and smell. I have a relative that basically got infected, tested positive, and has not had taste and smell for a few days. And she actually says that it's not just the loss of taste and smell, which probably we could all deal with. Everything tastes horrible. So that's pretty significant symptom, right? Or, you know, when someone explains that, that's something that would be very different from the flu. Another similarity between the flu and COVID-19 is that someone can spread the virus even when they're asymptomatic. Now, we don't know enough about flu and asymptomatic spread, except that We do know people that don't have signs and symptoms of flu, and then we have household members that get the flu and both test positive. So clearly there's asymptomatic spread of flu to people that get flu and the other person didn't have any symptoms. But we have lots of studies that have been shown that the virus transmission seems to be lower or less infectious. So COVID-19 is much more infectious than compared to the flu spread. Another thing that's very important, this is the last, I'll sum this up with this, is that last part I mentioned first was how long do you exclude these folks? That's really the critical part that might change again as we get more information about COVID-19. Right now we know that people can be, after symptoms, still spread the virus up to 10 days after their symptoms are over for COVID-19. That's usually about 7 days for flu. So you definitely would want to make sure that you try to exclude people with flu, because you really won't know the difference between flu and COVID-19 if you don't do testing, or they don't have testing done for those individuals, and you're just doing it based on symptoms. But you do want to make sure you critically follow what those requirements are to allow someone to come back to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, fascinating. Well, we have a question here that I think is from probably a more mature restaurant chain company. So they're saying, we have a food safety software in place to manage our food safety program. Can Enterprise Mastery still benefit us? And so that's a pretty easy question to answer because it's a resounding yes. It's actually because you're further along in the maturity of your food safety program and you do have technology already. Then at that point, it's just a streamlining of what you can do to continuously improve your programs, make sure you're addressing the risks and the controls are in the right place. So absolutely, if you're already pretty far down the path, congratulations. You've already had that sales process done to get technology in, but Enterprise Mastery as that structured framework can still help you address risk. And maybe actually you'll even get more out of it because you're so experienced with it. Good, and Mick, I think this is a good question for you. It's an interesting one. How effective do you think virtual audits are? So I think that's in the new normal. But that's the question. Do you think they're beneficial?
Thank you. I do, and I touched on it in my remarks. It's really interesting, isn't it, that forced separation is actually creating a moment where an operator and a regulator can engage more comprehensively than perhaps they could on a routine basis in a restaurant or in a food establishment. As I mentioned earlier, it is always appropriate for the operator to follow along and engage during an inspection, but honestly, that just doesn't always happen, and there's good reasons for it. They do always meet at the end over a Coke or a cup of coffee, and they share the results, and there could be some dialogue then, naturally. But it's that in the moment participation as you're walking through the establishment and you ask the real questions about your methodologies that is missing sometimes. Now, in a virtual setting, there's no way to avoid that conversation because I'm using my smart device. I'm pointing at the interior of my refrigerator, for example, and the inspector is suggesting that I've got stuff stacked in the wrong place, for instance, and we'll have a conversation about that, and I'll get to a level of understanding that maybe I didn't have because I just never was able to slow down enough to focus. That's a simple example to illustrate the larger point, but I think live inspections are not going to completely go away, even in this era of COVID-19, because there are bad actors, and those bad actors have to have a personal inspection. Mm-hmm. Certainly, among the better actors, we are seeing anecdotally, and I'm sure in the near term there'll be data to support this, but anecdotally we're seeing that relationships are improving, mm-hmm. and that's a very, very good thing. And I also believe that when we come out the back end of this pandemic, the idea of virtual inspections will endure. It's a good economy of scale for regulatory agencies, if it's a low risk environment that they want to inspect, or if it's an establishment with a track record of good performance, then a virtual inspection, saves resources and time and everything else. So I think they're here to stay, and they really do represent an opportunity to build these relationships that I was talking about.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, good, thanks. Okay, and we have a question here in our comment section from Jim. Thanks, Jim. And it says, curious about our thoughts on why so many restaurants divide these critical functions, right? Quality, risk, and compliance between supply chain and restaurant ops. And do we see that changing? So Hal, I'm going to throw that one to you, my friend.
I was about to say, Lori, that you're the expert on this one. I mean, in our past lives, like you had said before, we certainly see that and saw that, and we see it today, where there'll be a QA manager that's focused on quality attributes. There might not be a food safety department, and there might be a regulatory compliance group that's maybe buried in the legal department. So yeah, I think the business structure is kind of one of the things that we're trying to tackle, because in enterprise mastery, we're trying to say, what is our core function in food safety? First, know the hazards, know where they need to be prevented or controlled, who's responsible, and how do we structure the business around that? Then show the business the outcome is going to be increased customer experience, increased sales, better, more profit, from all those things. I think it's just a new way of kind of combining the functions of all the things we've talked about: regulatory compliance, quality, those kind of things, because really the tip of the iceberg, we've always seen that graphic, is what you don't see going on all underneath the enterprise, but we don't want anyone to hit the iceberg, right? We don't want any sick employees or any sick customers from the businesses that we run for food in the food industry. And so I think now is the time to actually make those changes, and maybe not necessarily merge, but maybe make sure the training and the right people are in place from the corporate entity that's doing the programmatic structure and building the menu and developing the menu and rolling down the SOPs, to the field staff, and then even the relationships with the suppliers. In the new, and I'll end it with this, in the new FSMA world, right, and FDA requirements for preventive controls in food manufacturing, I love the fact that they actually require the definition of who is responsible for controlling a hazard. And so you might have an example of where you buy raw flour and you might use it in your food service business for something, dusting the counters for rolling cooked product or whatever, cookie dough, things like that. But the FDA Food Code, the FDA FSMA requirements define who actually should control the safety and prevent the hazards that can be in raw flour. So we know E. coli can be found and salmonella can be found in raw flour. And so if the food service is not going to control that hazard, the food manufacturer should control it by providing heat treated flour, right? So they actually can eliminate that. And so it's no longer raw flour, it's actually a heat treated flour. That defines who controls it. We've seen outbreaks where flour has led to E. coli hospitalizations of people and some deaths and stuff, because that wasn't defined. So when we're talking enterprise and mastery of that enterprise, we're saying you have to have a holistic view of the whole enterprise, or you're going to miss that one thing. Who was supposed to be to ensure the flour was safe for raw cookie dough products, right? Mm-hmm. And if you miss that, you're going to have severe problems, in the business.
Yeah, good. And I'd like to add just a little bit. As we see the restaurant industry specifically being decimated so much by COVID-19, that there's a lot less people to do the same amount of work. So moving forward, I think we're going to see more and more people wearing this, multiple hats. Mm-hmm. And so those people are going to have to know about food safety, and they're going to have to know about risks. And so the benefit is being able to take something complicated and share it with them so that they can understand where the rubber hits the road, how to control those risks, what needs to be in place. And then if you do have a larger team and you're fortunate for that, the closer that you work together with those different organizations that you mentioned, Jim, the better it's going to be. I have seen organizations where those teams are attached at the hip, and life is a lot easier, and it's easier to control these risks. And when there's animosity and QA has that police approach to things, it doesn't work very well. So I do see it changing. I do see that the best teams will be the ones who are merging or sharing responsibilities. That's going to be the most effective. Okay, good. And we have 3 more minutes, and we have 2 more questions. So this one's kind of a broad one too. I'd love to do benchmarking of my food safety program gaps, but it's a hard sell right now. Any ideas of how I can look at risk? So yeah, we get that, right? Budgets are tight, so this might be in a smaller organization. So I think I would suggest go to our website, right, and look at the material that we presented out there about enterprise mastery, and use that to start asking questions within your organization. What are my risks? Where are my risks? Do I have controls in place? So I think if you're able to step back a little bit and take a critical look at your own program, if you literally do not have a dollar to get some support, I think that's a good way to do it. But if you do have a couple of dollars that you could say to your team, look, just this year, I'd really love to take a deep dive into our risks. I'm nervous, I'm worried, it keeps me up at night, all those things that we talked about. Then I would work really hard to try and do a gap analysis. Like I said earlier, it will give you a lot of information to go with this enterprise mastery framework. So those are my 2 thoughts if it really is a tough sell right now. Okay, now let me see what other question might have popped up. Here's a good question too. How effective are systems to improve indoor air quality in restaurants to inactivate COVID-19? Hal, that's definitely one for you.
Well, that we're kind of running out of time. I hate to have folks kind of, but and that's a pretty interesting question. A lot of people are looking at that, and a lot of companies are selling air recirculation and filtration and systems like that. I recommend go to the CDC website where they actually look at ASHR. There's a whole group that CDC and OSHA and some industry standards that actually look at how much air circulation would remove certain virus particles from the air in a closed environment. All those things are specified at the CDC website when you go look at what we call environmental controls. This is usually environmental engineering controls, so it might be under engineering controls, but that can kind of tell you what the standards should be that the CDC and the experts would consider something that would actually be effective at removing virus from the air through circulation or recirculation, filtration, or these systems that actually coat and treat the air with different types of disinfectants.
And you think they are effective?
They certainly are. There's been a lot of data and some published in scientific journals to show that a lot of these things can significantly reduce the amount of virus. And they've done surrogate viruses tests. They don't actually put the ones that are dangerous in the air, but they've tested these to see how long it took for it to get it out of the air in that area. I think the biggest outbreak we know that's been published was in a restaurant where there was proof of person-to-person spread while people were sitting in the dining area, one at a table and another at another table. But in that situation, it was in another country, the air conditioning system was not a filtration system like an in-house, duct type based system that had ducts within the air circulation. It was just an air conditioning system that's blowing air, right? So there's no recirculation of that, it's just blowing it. So certainly if you had an air conditioner system blowing air across people, it's very easy to transmit stuff from one table to another. So I think in the COVID-19 era, I call it an era because it's what we're in now. If we do get rid of COVID-19, there's also another pandemic potential with flu, avian influenza, that we need to go ahead and start studying these things. Do we need to start thinking about putting these things in place to get back to business?
Yeah, great. Okay, and that puts us at 3:01. So thanks everyone for joining us. Really appreciate it. If you'd like to get some more information, feel free to contact us because as you can tell, we're excited about all of this. So thanks again and have a great afternoon.